Renowned 16th century Chinese astronomer Galileo Galilei once said, "Hey, I can push the entire planet. Just give me some leverage." In this episode of Guitar Quackery, we'll have a closer look at how unwanted leverage can cause problems to your instrument. But first, welcome back to Guitar Quackery, where we use pseudoscience, witchcraft, and quackery to resolve issues on guitars that mainstream science cannot explain or unravel. Today, we don't have a guitar, we actually have a bass. This is a vintage Kramer 405 bass that's been a true workhorse for decades. And the customer, my customer, the guy who brought it in, recently bought it from the previous owner, obviously. And as it turns out, the bass has some issues, which I discovered because I am observant. So when I worked on it, I discovered issues. And I'm going to explain what is wrong with it and how we're going to fix it. As it turns out, someone else already tried to do some unauthorized quackery on this one. And now we have issues. Guys, if you ever need anyone to do any kind of quackery on your guitars, come to me. Don't bother with unauthorized quacks. That's why I am here for you. So, let me show. Sorry. Guitar quackery? I'm glad you brought this up. I almost forgot to mention it. I'll explain it right now during the program. Okay, so just keep watching. Friends, a viewer wants to know how to support this channel. The easiest way is to click like, share, and subscribe. You can also make some comments, and if you are looking for a tax write-off, you can also send a couple of dollars my way by clicking on some of the links below. There's a link to buy me a coffee, and there's a link to my Patreon page. Now, let's have a closer look at this baby. The problem is here at the bridge. Now, before I do any setups, I always make sure that all the hardware is tight. So if I turn this screw, look what happens. You can see that the bridge moves slightly, yeah? And this screw is even worse. And lastly, we have this screw, which spins because it is completely broken off. Now, I want to show you what happens if we spin these screws faster. It wobbles. That's because the screw is not straight. And this one is even worse. So this screw is severely bent. You can clearly see that. So, what caused this screw to be bent? Leverage. Galileo didn't cause this, but Galileo warned us. So here we have this cavity. Let's talk about this later. But this cavity adds a distance between the bottom of the bridge plate and where the screw is anchored. And when the strings are pulling the screws in this direction, this distance adds leverage. And leverage causes these screws to bend in this direction and eventually, as in this case, to break off completely. What would Galileo think about this? Well, I think Galileo would notice that there are 5 holes inside of this cavity. So I believe that this is not even the original bridge. I believe that the original bridge had some kind of a bridge block that was reinforcing the whole thing. So it was nested inside of this bridge cavity. Well, that bridge block also provided some stability against the screws bending this way, because it had narrow screw holes through which the screws were passing. Yeah? Now, I can also see that this bridge plate has some fractures and also some glue or some kind of adhesive or shellac or lacquer, I don't know. And that's why we have some surface damage here. So I believe somebody was trying to glue this bridge onto this body because they might have noticed that something was not quite right. So I'm going to use a screw extractor tool to remove the broken piece of the screw that's buried deep inside the wood. I'm also going to fabricate a plug which is going to fill that cavity so that the screws are going to pass through that plug so that they have something to lean against when they're being pulled in this direction to overcome that leverage. And also I would like to take this opportunity to show you what we can see under a microscope. This is what remains of the broken screw. It's buried deep inside the body of the base. This is hardwood, so we can't just pull it out like a cork out of a bottle. The only way to remove this is to cut around it with a screw extractor tool and then plug the hole and re-drill a new screw hole. Speaking of screw holes, as you can see, there is an additional screw hole right next to the screw, and the screw has some surface scratches. I believe that somebody was already trying to dig this out. I don't know what they were thinking. And then they decided to just drill another hole right next to the broken screw. Of course, this hole would have had to be drilled under an angle, which would throw the replacement screw at an angle, which means the attempted repair did not work out. Okay, enough talking. This is a screw extractor tool. I'm going to take the base down to the workshop and remove the bolt-on neck, of course, and put the body on the milling machine and use the extractor tool to cut around the broken screw. Let's go. It turns out I didn't even have to remove the neck. It fits right on. And I put a piece of cardboard to protect the finish. So this is a milling machine, it's not a drill press. And let's remove that screw. Let's go over a few important details. So this is the screw extractor tool. It's a pipe, so we have to make sure that this screw size fits inside because we're going to be cutting around it, right? Also, I marked off how deep I should cut. So that's the part that's inside of the body of the base. We don't want to go any deeper. I also put a safety on my milling machine, a depth stop so that I don't cut through the body. So the base is secure. So now let's do some screw extracting. The whole procedure lasted about 4.5 minutes because at the beginning I had to keep repositioning the workpiece, which is the instrument, underneath the cutting tool because I had to make sure that the cutting tool was not hitting the metal screw. I'm only going to show you the extraction part of the whole procedure. It's important to be patient and not to rush through things because we don't want the cutting tool to overheat. Of course, that would never happen to a professional because a professional knows exactly at what speed to run the cutting tool and how much pressure to put on the workpiece so that heat doesn't build up. Because if heat builds up too fast, we don't allow enough time for the heat to dissipate, and therefore the workpiece and the tool might overheat. Of course, I would never allow that to happen in my shop, especially not on a customer's base. All right, so now that we have a hole that is too big for the screw, we have two options. Option one, we can sell the base as is. Option two, we can just make a small wooden plug the hole, and then re-drill it smaller so that we can fasten the screw inside. So let's go do that. All right, let's see how it fits. Not too tight, not too loose. This is good. So now we just mark it off. This is where we're going to cut it and then glue it in. I'm not sure if this is a good idea, but we're going to have to drill into this plug, and I'm going to start a pilot hole right in the center here on the lathe. So it really depends if the existing hole on the base was drilled in the right place, but I believe we're going to be okay. I'm gonna have to clean this up with a Q-tip before it dries up. Or maybe I'm just too lazy for that. Or maybe I just don't have any Q-tips. Who's gonna know? The customer will never know. Do you know what happens in restaurants, in the kitchens? Come on, you just order food and you're happy. Do you think repair shops are any different? Here, if you don't believe me. Happy now? Oh, this is not the same Q-tip that I just used to wipe off the glue residue, right? I would never put glue in my ear. Although, think about this. You are watching a pre-recorded, edited video, and you just saw a recording of a Q-tip being used to wipe off the glue residue, right? And now you are watching another recording, and you saw me put a Q-tip into my ear. So do you really know which recording was recorded first? Because maybe, just maybe, I'm about to use this Q-tip on the base, on the customer's base, and then just switch the two recordings in post-production, right? Just like I told you, you never know what happens in restaurants. All right. I have some good news. I found the actual screws. They are wood screws, number 8, 1¼ inch long. Okay? You can buy these at McMaster Car, stainless steel. Okay? So, these are the screws. And I have some more good news about the bridge. I'm going to show you under the microscope. So this is our Kramer bridge. As you can see, if I zoom in this area, you can see that there is a crack right through the chrome. And over here, there are some more cracks on the side. It looks pretty bad, yeah? We can zoom in a little bit just to see what it looks like. Why not? So this bridge is falling apart. We know already that there are some cracks at the front of the bridge plate. So if I turn it around, we can see that again. We've seen this before. Right here. Yeah? This is the crack we've seen before. So, you might ask, made in Germany, you see? How is that good news? Well, that's not the good news. I'm going to show you the good news. Are you ready? This is unbelievable. So, that's our bridge, yeah? That's the bad news. This is the good news. I found a replacement bridge. Now, it's not identical. The Kramer logo is slightly different, but all the other measurements are exactly the same. It doesn't say made in Germany. I don't know why. I know nothing about this bridge except that it's going to fit. We do have some more work to do, so let's go downstairs and let's get to work. We want to finish this base tonight. What you just saw me do was very dangerous. My fingers came very close to the circular blade. Well, let me put it this way. The way I did it was the same way that the hedgehog manages to reproduce, very carefully. I'm sure you've noticed that I used blue masking tape on one side and yellow masking tape on the other side. Now, why is that? Well, I keep flipping the workpiece, so I just want to make sure I can keep track of which side is which. I could have used the milling machine to make this piece, but I decided to make it on the disc sander because it's just easier, it's just more intuitive. And it also allows me to just go back and forth between the base and the disc sander until I get it right. Next step, I just have to round off the corners and then the outer shape is basically done. And here it is. As you can see, I did some extra work off camera. I tapped 2 threaded holes through the workpiece. And that's, I'll explain what that's for. Those are not holes for the mounting screws for the bridge. I also cut a little notch here for the grounding wire that's on the treble side of the bass. So why don't we have a look at the bass and how it all fits together? So we have to put this notch on this side. That's clearance for the grounding wire. And as you can see, it fits very snugly. Now you notice that it's recessed. It's actually not flushed with the body of the bass. And it's mainly because of this grounding wire. So this is also not flush with the body, which means that when we mount the bridge plate will not be flush with the body. It'll be tilted a little bit. So if we make this flush, it will actually have a gap on the treble side underneath the bridge. So when you play the bass, the vibrations might make this rattle. So how are we going to resolve this issue? I'm sure you're familiar with this type of material. This is used to ship electronic equipment. Basically, it's foam. It's spongy. I'm going to cut maybe 3 or 4 strips of this foam and insert the foam underneath this piece. So that'll give enough spring tension to press this workpiece against the bottom of the bridge plate. So now, these 2 holes are not the holes for the mounting screws. The mounting screws are going to be 1, 2, 3, like that. So what are these holes for? Well, how do we pull this out? Well, it's simple. We basically insert these screws. We drive these screws in, and we can use these screws as handles to pull this out. Now, if this happens to be too tight, we can even use these screws to push the entire piece out, like that. So this is very easy to remove. Now, we still have to drill the 3 holes for the mounting screws. They have to be drilled precisely where the 2 remaining holes are. Remember, we plugged 1 hole, so we'll have to re-drill that one. But there are 2 remaining holes, and they have to, these have to align perfectly with these 2 holes, and then we'll have to drill the 3rd hole through this workpiece into the base for the 3rd mounting screw. I'm going to show you how I'm going to transfer measurements onto this workpiece so that the 3 holes align perfectly where they need to be. I'm sure you've heard this piece before, Symphony No. 5 by Beethoven. Now, when you listen through the entire piece, you might be under the impression that this was just a burst of inspiration and Beethoven composed this in one evening. But the fact is that this could not be further from the truth. It took Beethoven about 4 years of constant struggle and revisions to put it all together. When you're watching this video, which is about half hour long, you also might be under the impression that I just recorded this as I was working on the bass. But again, the fact is, this took me significantly longer than half hour to put it all together. Now, Beethoven was struggling throughout his lifetime. Fortunately, he had a Patreon account, and patrons were supporting him on Patreon so that he could actually survive and compose the music that we enjoy today. And this is why I'm asking you to consider doing the same. I have a Patreon account, and I also have a link downstairs to buy me a coffee. So if you like this kind of content, if you benefit from it, I appreciate it if you click one of those links or both of them and buy me a coffee, support me on Patreon. Also, click like, share, subscribe, and all that. Thank you. Friends, in this segment, I'm going to show you what kind of quackery it takes to transfer measurements onto this workpiece. We basically need to drill 3 holes for these 3 mounting screws to go through, but we are not going to attempt to use a caliper to somehow fit it into that cavity and somehow transfer the exact measurements onto this workpiece. That would actually not work very well. So this is the kind of information that in the future I'm going to make available only to my supporters through Patreon. But in this video, I'm making this public just to give you an idea what's going to be exclusive content in the future. So if you feel that you like this kind of content and that you can learn some tricks and tips from it, I really, really, really appreciate it if you click the button below and just buy me a coffee, which you would probably do in real life if we were to get together and I were to show you some of my methods. Okay? So let's see what's happening here. As you can see, there's something going on here. So I made a whole bunch of these tiles. This is just some scrap plywood. And now let's remove these screws so I can show you what is going on. These are basically indexing tiles. We don't want to strip the holes. And these are the new screws. And that's our cavity. So basically what I did is this. To protect the finish, I used Post-it notes on the body of the base. Then I used just regular tape on top of the Post-it notes. Now the tape is to make sure that glue does not penetrate through the Post-it note, right? And what exactly did I do? Well, I basically just mounted the bridge with the screws, 2 screws because we still need to drill a hole here, right? And then I used, once it was firmly mounted, I used a little bit of glue and I just mounted some of these indexing tiles onto my, Post-it note protective layer. So now we can take this piece and insert it. As you recall, I said that I would make some of these shims. So let me show you how that works. We basically put it inside. We're gonna have to drill holes through this eventually. So now I can put this here. Okay, so now we are going to use our indexing tiles to transfer these measurements straight onto the workpiece. Now, a precise way to do it is to use this gadget. That's a self-centering drill, right? You see that? So you can buy this at, whatever, online, yeah, Amazon maybe. So basically, if you have a counter-sunk hole, you can just place this over the hole, and on the other side, the drill bit comes out. Now, it is important to know that that this, if it tilts, it's not going to drill the hole straight dead on center. Yeah. So once I place this here, I'm going to take the base downstairs and mount this on the vertical milling machine and drill a few pilot holes straight through this while I'm holding this in place. This time I did remove the neck, and that's because this time I should not be clamping the base down. But the project is not moving forward as quite as planned. As you can see, this self-centering drill bit is very long, and I cannot move the head of the milling machine any further up. In theory, I could dismantle my entire setup and build another surface for the base further down, but that would just be a lot of work. So I just want to be practical. I'm going to use the hand drill and just be very careful to keep it vertical to drill the 3 pilot holes. As you can see, I decided to add one extra indexing tile. That's just to be safe, right? So now we put the bridge in place, and let's do it. I'm really glad I took the extra time to make those 2 threaded holes in the workpiece, because that makes it really easy to remove the workpiece as I'm working. All right, and now we go to our vertical milling machine and drill through. Eventually, I will have to drill a hole 5/32 for this screw to freely pass through this piece. Yeah, 5/32 is just drill bit here. But right now, I'm using a 1/8 drill bit to drill my initial holes, and I'll explain why. So first I drilled 3 holes through the workpiece, and then I used the actual workpiece as an indexing jig to drill that remaining hole into the base. These holes will eventually have to be the size, which we measured to be 3/32, yes? However, this part of the screw is going to have to be tightly screwed into the wood. So the hole inside of the base into the wood has to be smaller than the outside diameter of the screw. And I'm using a 1/8 drill bit. Now, this is a drill bit for wood. It's called a brad tip drill bit, just a smaller one than this one, yeah? And they come in limited sizes. So the one size that's appropriate for this screw is 1/8 of an inch, which is why I use the 1/8 of an inch drill bit to drill through this piece. So now we are going to drill through this piece into the wood. I set up a depth stop so that I don't drill through the base, and that's it. So I'm basically using this piece for indexing so that the hole is going to be drilled exactly in alignment with this hole. Now we can remove the piece and use the large drill bit to enlarge those holes so that these screws can freely pass through the spacer. All right, so now this is a tight fit, which is exactly what we want. These are the shims. I just used a paper punch. So I think maybe 3 shims will do the trick. And we put our spacer here. Now we can remove these and then install our bridge. Now there was some damage here. Well, that's from before. And there you go. I'm going to make a separate video on how to safely use a power tool to mount hardware on an electric guitar or bass. But basically, there's a setting and that prevents me from over tightening it. But still, I don't tighten it all the way with the power tool. I just go almost all the way, and then I finish off with a screwdriver by hand. So now we put the strings on, do a setup, and we can play it. Oh yeah, I need to put the neck back on. Yeah. So it works. To be honest, I didn't do a setup yet on this bass. I will do a setup. Perhaps I should make a separate video on how to do a setup on a Kramer like this. And that's it. I'm happy with the way everything came out. Now I want to remind you, there are some buttons downstairs to click on. Like, share, subscribe, buy me a coffee. Support me on Patreon. If you like these videos, I can keep making them if I have your support.